I've always believed that objects carry meaning. It's why I became a professional organizer. People think it's about throwing things away, but it's really about understanding what deserves to stay. That autumn day at Fresno's man-made lake wasn't even supposed to be about work. The breeze carried the scent of dying leaves and possibility as I walked along the shoreline, my blonde hair whipping across my face. I was 34 and somehow still looking for something I couldn't name. That's when I saw it. A weathered sketchbook, its edges curled from water damage, washed up on the pebbled shore like some kind of offering. I shouldn't have picked it up, professional boundaries and all that. But something about the worn leather cover called to me. I flipped it open, and my breath caught. Inside were masterful sketches, buildings stripped to geometric essence, landscapes reduced to their most vital lines. Each page showed the world boiled down to what mattered, nothing more. The exact opposite of what my clients usually wanted. "That's mine," a voice said behind me, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the book into the water. I turned to find a woman about my age, maybe younger, 29 or 30, with wild red hair that seemed to capture the autumn light and hold it. Her green eyes narrowed at me, suspicious yet curious. "I'm sorry," I said, clutching the book. It washed up, and I was just looking through my private thoughts. Her freckled face wasn't exactly angry, but not friendly either. "I was going to try to find the owner," I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "I'm Stephanie Anderson." She hesitated before answering, "Amber Perry." When our hands met to exchange the sketchbook, something unexpected happened. A current, not electric, that's too cliché. But something warm and startling passed between us. Her fingertips were stained with charcoal, mine perfectly manicured, opposites in every visible way. "You're an artist," I said, stating the obvious because I suddenly couldn't think clearly. "And you're—" She looked me over, taking in my pressed slacks and organized tote bag. "Someone who's never out of control?" The assessment stung because it was accurate. "Professional organizer," I said, trying to sound proud rather than defensive. Amber laughed, a sound that seemed to scatter across the water. "The universe has a sense of humor. I'm a minimalist who can't seem to keep anything organized." "Those seem contradictory," I said, genuinely curious. She hugged the sketchbook to her chest. "I believe in owning almost nothing, but can never find the few things I keep." I shouldn't have said it. Shouldn't have offered. But looking into those green eyes, I heard myself ask, "Maybe you need professional help?" "Are you offering your services?" She raised an eyebrow. "First consultation's free," I replied, surprising myself with the forwardness. Amber studied me for a long moment, the wind tangling her red curls further. "Why not? Here's my number." She scribbled it on a scrap of paper torn from her recovered sketchbook. Our fingers brushed again as she handed it to me, and this time, I couldn't deny the flutter in my chest. As I watched her walk away, silhouetted against the autumn lakeside, I had no idea that this chance encounter would soon have us running for our lives, or that the woman who couldn't hold on to anything would become the one thing I couldn't let go. 3 days later, I stood at Amber's apartment door, professional tote in hand, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Her building was in the artistic district of Fresno, all exposed brick and questionable security. "It's open," she called when I knocked. I stepped into what could only be described as beautiful chaos. The space was massive, an old warehouse converted to a loft, with soaring windows that flooded the room with autumn light. It was nearly empty of furniture, yet somehow cluttered with art supplies, half-finished sculptures, and canvases leaning against every wall. "Sorry about the mess." Amber appeared from behind a canvas, wearing paint-splattered overalls, her red hair piled haphazardly on top of her head. "Or wait, I'm not sorry. This is my creative process." My fingers itched to organize, categorize, and label. "For a minimalist, you have a lot of stuff." "I own exactly 37 personal items," she said defensively. "Everything else is just creative material." "And does creative material not count as possessions?" Amber shrugged, gesturing around the chaotic space. "These aren't things I'm attached to. They're just vessels for expression." I bit my tongue and set down my tote bag. "Show me your sketchbooks. Let's start there." She led me to a corner where dozens of identical leather-bound books were scattered in piles, some open, some closed, none in any discernible order. "How do you find anything?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "I don't need to find things. Whatever I need usually finds me." I couldn't help but laugh. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Instead of being offended, Amber smiled. Your world must be very small, Stephanie Anderson. I began sorting the sketchbooks by date, but stopped when I flipped one open. Inside were stunning cityscapes, but not the typical tourist views. These showed the underbellies of buildings, perspectives from alleyways, the secret hearts of urban spaces. These are extraordinary, I admitted, forgetting my professional distance. Just because I don't organize doesn't mean I don't have focus, Amber said, suddenly close behind me. I could smell paint and something citrusy in her hair. You see the world differently, I said. These lines, they're so essential. No wasted space. That's what minimalism is about. Not emptiness, but keeping only what speaks to your soul. I turned to find her face inches from mine. But how can anything speak to you when it's buried under all this? The argument that followed was like nothing I'd experienced with any client before. Amber was passionate, articulate, and completely wrong about organization. I was clinical, methodical, and clearly missing something vital about creative chaos. You're suffocating under self-imposed rules, she exclaimed at one point. And you're drowning in unnecessary clutter, I shot back. We ended up face to face, both breathing hard. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, Amber started to laugh. It bubbled up from somewhere genuine, and against my will, I felt my own laughter joining hers. We're both ridiculous, she said, wiping her eyes. Completely, I agreed. Maybe it was the laughter, or the autumn light streaming through the windows, or something more fundamental shifting between us. Whatever the cause, one moment we were laughing, and the next, her lips brushed against mine. So briefly I could have imagined it. But the look in her eyes confirmed what had happened. I stepped back, flustered. That was unprofessional. I'm not looking for professional, Amber said quietly. Maybe that's the point. I gathered my things quickly, making excuses about another appointment. But as I drove away from her building, all I could think about was the taste of paint and possibility on her lips, and how my carefully organized life suddenly felt like it was sliding deliciously out of control. A week passed before I saw Amber again. I'd made excuses to cancel our follow-up session, but when she invited me to her gallery exhibition, some magnetic pull overrode my professional judgment. The gallery was one of those industrial spaces in downtown Fresno, all exposed pipes and concrete floors. I arrived dressed impeccably in a tailored pantsuit, hair perfectly styled, a stark contrast to the artsy crowd. Amber's artwork transformed the space, massive canvases showing cityscapes stripped to their essence, using negative space in ways that made my organized heart skip beats. You came. Her voice behind me sent a ripple down my spine. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made her red hair flame brighter against pale skin. Your work deserved to be seen, I said, more honestly than I'd intended. She smiled, almost shy now, so different from her studio boldness. Want to see my favorite? She led me to a smaller piece tucked in a corner, a beach scene with a lone figure finding something in the sand. With a jolt, I recognized it as our meeting. You painted me? My voice came out breathier than intended. You inspired me, she answered simply. The moment stretched between us, taut with possibility, until the gallery's television caught my attention. The local news was playing, something about an art heist. I wouldn't have paid attention except for the grainy security footage showing two women fleeing a museum. The suspects, described as a blonde woman in her 30s and a red-headed woman in her late 20s, are wanted in connection with the theft of several valuable pieces, the news anchor was saying. Amber laughed nervously. They could be describing us. That's when I noticed the security guard staring at us, then back at the television, his expression hardening with recognition, or misrecognition. Amber, I whispered urgently, that guard thinks... Before I could finish, he was speaking into his radio, eyes never leaving us. We need to go, I said, grabbing her hand. Why? Why? Now. Amber. We moved quickly through the gallery, trying not to draw attention, but I could sense the guard following. When we reached the back exit, Amber glanced back in confusion. Stephanie, what's happening? That guard thinks we're the thieves from the news. We matched the description. Her eyes widened. That's ridiculous. We can just explain... Stop. Security. The guard's voice boomed behind us. Panic surged through me. Being detained, questioned, having my name associated with theft, it would destroy my business, my reputation, everything I'd built. Run? I said, surprising myself. We burst through the exit door into the alley behind the gallery, the guard's shouts following us. My sensible heels clattered on pavement as we raced toward my car parked a block away. "This is insane," Amber gasped as we ran. "We haven't done anything wrong." "Tell that to him." I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking. "Get in." We tumbled into my meticulously clean sedan just as the guard emerged from the alley. I reversed so quickly the tires squealed, something my orderly self would normally never do. "Stephanie, we should go back and explain," Amber said, breathless beside me. "Running makes us look guilty." But terror had taken over my rational mind. All I could see was my business collapsing, clients vanishing, my carefully constructed life falling apart. "We'll explain later," I said, checking the rearview mirror. From somewhere safe. As we sped away from the city lights, the gravity of what we'd done settled over us. We were running. From the law. Two women who'd barely known each other 2 weeks, now fugitives based on a case of mistaken identity. "Where are we going?" Amber asked quietly. I realized I had no plan, another first for me. "I don't know." Away. She reached across the console and took my hand, her artist's fingers warm against my skin. "Together, then." That single word, together, sent electricity through me even as fear clutched at my throat. Whatever happened next, we were in it together. And somehow, that made running feel almost like flying. Night had fallen completely by the time we reached the outskirts of Fresno. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and Amber sat silently beside me, occasionally checking her phone. "They're calling us the Art Bandits," she said, her voice tight. "There's a decent reward. The security footage is all over social media." I pulled into a motel so nondescript it was almost invisible. The Starlight Inn, its sign missing several letters. The kind of place that took cash and asked no questions. "Wait here," I said, grabbing my emergency cash from the glove compartment. Minutes later, I returned with a key, an actual metal key, not a card. Room 118. Around back. The room was everything I'd feared. Faded floral bedspreads, mystery stains on the carpet, and a single queen-sized bed that had seen better decades. "Only one bed," Amber noted, dropping her small bag on a wobbly table. "It was all they had," I lied. In truth, I hadn't even asked for alternatives. I sanitized every surface I could while Amber flipped through local channels. Each showed the same security footage, the same descriptions that matched us too perfectly. "We can't stay on the run forever," she said, hugging her knees to her chest on the bed. "Just until they catch the real thieves," I replied, knowing how hollow it sounded. We ordered pizza and ate in silence, the gravity of our situation settling between us. Two professional women now fugitives, hiding in a seedy motel, all because we happened to match a description. Later, awkwardly changing into the t-shirts we'd buy from a gas station, we navigated the uncomfortable dance of two strangers forced to share intimate space. "I've never been in trouble before," I admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Not even a parking ticket." Amber laughed softly. "Little Miss Perfect until now? You could say that." I found myself telling her about my childhood, about parents who demanded excellence, about building a life where everything had its place because nothing else had ever been acceptable. "You've been organizing since before it was your job," she observed. "What about you?" I asked, desperate to shift attention away from myself. She stretched out beside me, red hair fanning across the pillow. "Opposite, military family, moved every 2 years. I learned to live with almost nothing because anything I collected would just need packing again. So you became a minimalist by necessity, and an artist to create permanence where there was none." We talked for hours, strangers becoming something else in that dingy room with its single bed and shared fear. I learned about her first art show at 19, her brief engagement to a gallery owner, her solo travels through Europe with just a backpack. She learned about my business degree, my 5-year plans, the engagement I'd broken because he wanted me to give up my business. Near midnight, when the conversation finally lulled, we faced the inevitable awkwardness of the sleeping arrangements. "I can take the floor," I offered. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, patting the space beside her. "We're both adults." Lying beside her in darkness, I was acutely aware of every breath, every small movement. Moonlight filtered through cheap curtains, illuminating her profile. "Stephanie?" she whispered. "Yes? I'm scared." The admission, so simple and honest, broke something open in me. I turned to face her, finding her eyes wide and vulnerable in the darkness. "Me too," I confessed. Her hand found mine above the covers, our fingers intertwining. Then, with a gentleness that made my heart ache, she leaned forward and kissed me. Not accidental this time, not brief. A deliberate choice, tender and questioning. I answered by pulling her closer, my hands finding the warmth of her skin beneath her borrowed shirt. In that moment, running didn't feel like running anymore. It felt like finding something I hadn't known was missing. "We need to change our appearance," I said the next morning, studying our reflections in the spotted motel mirror. "My blonde hair is too recognizable." "I've got scissors in my bag," Amber offered. When I raised my eyebrows, she shrugged. "Artist, remember? Always prepared to cut something." We pushed the flimsy motel furniture against the walls, creating a makeshift salon in the center of the room. I sat on the edge of the bathtub while Amber stood behind me, fingers gently combing through my hair. "You sure about this?" she asked, scissors poised. I nodded, throat tight. My hair had been the same length since college, long, straight, controlled. Like everything else in my life before Amber. The first snip made me flinch. Blonde strands fell around me, collecting on the tile floor. With each cut, I felt something shifting, not just my appearance, but something deeper. "Almost done," Amber murmured, her breath warm against my neck. "You're being very brave." "It's just hair," I said, not believing it for a second. She turned me toward the mirror. My reflection was a shock, choppy, chin length, and somehow younger. More free. "Now for color," she said, producing a box of drugstore hair dye. "I'm thinking brunette." The process was surprisingly intimate. Amber's fingers worked the dye into my newly short hair, massaging my scalp, occasionally letting her hands drift to my neck, my shoulders. Each touch sent shivers through me that had nothing to do with fear. "Your turn to teach me something," she said when we'd finished rinsing the dye. "How do we stay hidden? You're the organized one." I smiled at the role reversal. "First rule, cash only. No credit cards, no digital trail. Done. I never carry cards anyway. Second, we need a destination, somewhere isolated." Amber thought for a moment. "My professor has a cabin, about 2 hours from here, in the mountains. She's in Europe for a sabbatical. How would we get in?" "She keeps a key under a Buddha statue on the porch. Told me once I could use it any time for artistic retreats." It was risky, but better than motel hopping. Third rule, new backstory. We're not Stephanie and Amber anymore. We're Jane and Laura, Amber suggested. Sisters on a road trip. Sisters? I raised an eyebrow. Her laugh was low and musical. "Fine, cousins." We spent the afternoon practicing our new identities, creating just enough detail to be believable without being complicated. Amber was a natural, slipping effortlessly into character. I was stiffer, overthinking every element. "Relax," she said, taking my hands. "No one's going to interrogate us. Just be present." "Present isn't my strong suit," I admitted. "Then let's practice that too." She pulled me to my feet, put her hands on my waist. "Close your eyes. What do you feel right now?" I closed my eyes, feeling her warmth, the gentle pressure of her hands. "Your touch," I whispered. "What else?" My heart beating too fast, the air conditioning on my skin, your perfume, something citrusy. "That's being present," she murmured, her voice closer now. "Not tomorrow, not yesterday, just now." When I opened my eyes, she was inches away, her green eyes searching mine. The kiss that followed was different from the night before, less tentative, more certain. Her hand slid beneath my shirt, tracing patterns on my skin that made me gasp. We moved to the bed, clothes discarded, inhibitions falling away with them. In all my 34 years, I'd never felt so seen, so known. Amber's artist hands mapped my body with deliberate care, finding places I hadn't known could feel such pleasure. "Is this okay?" she whispered against my neck. "Yes," I breathed, surprising myself with how completely I meant it. We explored each other with increasing urgency, her mouth hot against my breast, my hands tangled in her fiery hair. When she moved lower, tongue tracing patterns that made me arch and cry out, all thoughts of running, of being caught, of past and future disappeared. There was only now, only us, only the astonishing discovery that in losing control I'd found exactly what I needed. The mountain cabin was everything we needed, secluded, comfortable, and most importantly, equipped with internet. After 3 days of lying low, I was going stir-crazy without information. "We need to know what we're dealing with," I said, opening the laptop we'd purchased with cash from a pawn shop. "Knowledge is power." Amber lounged on the couch, sketching idly. "Or it's an obsession that will drive you crazy." She had adapted to life on the run with infuriating ease, while I struggled with every moment of uncertainty. The cabin itself reflected our differences. By the second day, my side was meticulously organized while her space resembled a creative hurricane. "Found something," I said, staring at the screen. "The art bandits have struck again, 2 days ago, while we were already here." Amber dropped her sketchbook, rushing to my side. "That proves our innocence." "Not quite. We could be working with accomplices." I scrolled through the article, but it gives us a lead. They stole a specific painting, The Woman in Gold. "That's Richter's work, worth millions." At my surprised look, she shrugged. "I may be disorganized, but I know art history." I began creating a spreadsheet of the thefts, looking for patterns. 3 museums in 2 weeks, all targeting modern masterpieces. "These aren't random crimes. They're building a collection," Amber mused. "But why those specific pieces?" We spent the day researching, me tracking dates and locations, Amber identifying the artistic significance of each stolen work. By evening, a pattern emerged. They're all being stolen in the exact order they appeared in last month's Collector's Digest feature, I realized, which means I know where they'll strike next. "The Fresno Museum of Modern Art," Amber said, seeing the same pattern. "There's a Rothko piece there." A wild idea took shape in my mind. What if we caught them in the act, cleared our names? "That's insane," Amber said, but her eyes sparked with excitement. "We'd be walking right into danger." "We're already in danger," I countered. "At least this way we take control." We spent hours outlining a plan. We'd stake out the museum, document the real thieves, and anonymously tip off the police. It was risky but possible. As night fell, a storm rolled in, thunder echoing between the mountains. The cabin's large windows displayed nature's fury in spectacular fashion. "It's beautiful," Amber said, standing at the glass. Lightning illuminated her profile, and my breath caught at the sight. "Yes, it is." I wasn't looking at the storm. She turned, catching my gaze, and smiled slowly. "Come here." I crossed to her, drawn by something stronger than gravity. Her kiss tasted of the wine we'd been sharing, rich and intoxicating. The lights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. We stood frozen until Amber laughed. "Perfect timing for a horror movie," she joked. A crash outside startled us both. Amber clutched my arm. "What was that?" Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone for its flashlight. "Stay behind me." We moved cautiously toward the door. The beam of light caught something moving on the porch. I nearly screamed before realizing it was just a branch that had fallen against the cabin. "Just the storm," I said, releasing a shaky breath. When I turned back, Amber was so close I could feel her trembling. "You were ready to protect me," she said softly. "Of course. No one's ever done that before." The vulnerability in her voice undid me completely. I kissed her, harder this time, with all the fear and desire that had been building for days. She responded immediately, backing me against the wall. Our second time together was different, urgent, almost desperate, as if the storm's energy had infused us both. When blue and red lights suddenly flashed outside, we froze in panic. "Police," Amber whispered, eyes wide with fear. We peered carefully through the window, but it was only an emergency vehicle clearing a fallen tree further down the road. The moment of terror passed, but it changed something between us. This wasn't just attraction anymore. Somewhere between running and hiding, between planning and hoping, I'd fallen for this woman who saw the world in ways I never could. "We'll be okay, right?" she asked, her head on my chest as we lay in the darkness. I stroked her hair, feeling more certain than I had any right to be. "Together, we will." The Fresno Museum of Modern Art looked different in the darkness, more fortress than gallery. We'd spent 3 days planning this stakeout, analyzing security patterns and predicting the thieves' movements with a precision that would have impressed professional detectives. Are you sure about this? Amber whispered as we huddled in the shadows of an alley across from the museum. 2 weeks on the run had changed us both. My once perfect brunette bob now messy, Amber's red hair hidden under a dark cap. No, I admitted. But it's our best chance. We'd timed our arrival for an hour before the museum closed. The Rothko painting hung in the East Wing, where security was heaviest during the day but thinned at night due to budget cuts. Information I'd gleaned from public records, while Amber charmed details from a former security guard at a coffee shop. There, Amber nudged me, pointing to a service entrance. A cleaning crew had arrived, wheeling equipment into the building. That's our way in? I asked, feeling my stomach tighten with fear. She nodded. Janitorial uniforms we borrowed are in the bag. Minutes later, transformed into maintenance workers, we slipped into the museum behind the genuine cleaning crew. The plan was simple: position ourselves near the Rothko, document the real thieves with our phones, then anonymously alert security. Remember, I whispered as we pushed our borrowed cleaning cart, we're not heroes. We just need evidence. Amber squeezed my hand. Then back to the cabin? Then anywhere you want to go, I promised. We positioned ourselves in a storage closet across from our target, peering through a crack in the door. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The museum closed, the night guard made his first rounds, and silence settled heavily around us. Maybe we were wrong, Amber whispered, her breath warm against my neck in our cramped hiding place. Then we heard it, the faint beep of the security system being overridden. 2 figures in black appeared in the corridor, moving with practiced efficiency. That's them, I breathed, raising my phone to record. The thieves were women, just as described, but as they came closer, I gasped. One was blonde, the other red-haired, but they were nothing like us. The blonde was at least 50, with sharp features and surgeon-precise movements. The redhead was younger, with a cold efficiency to her actions. Sisters, Amber whispered. Look at their profiles. She was right, the resemblance was unmistakable. They moved toward the Rothko with the confidence of professionals, producing tools to bypass the alarm system. Got them, I said, recording every movement. What happened next was a blur. The door we'd been leaning against suddenly gave way, sending us tumbling into the corridor. The thieves whirled, their faces masks of shock then calculation. Well, the older woman said, her accent vaguely European. Our doppelgangers. Run! I shouted, grabbing Amber's hand. We fled through the museum, alarms blaring around us. The thieves pursued, surprisingly fast for their age. Amber pulled me down a service corridor I hadn't noticed, her artist's eye for detail saving us precious seconds. The security office, she panted. If we can get there. A gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet embedding in the wall inches from my head. Terror gave us new speed, adrenaline flooding every muscle. We burst into the main gallery, a vast open space with nowhere to hide. The thieves entered behind us, the older one training her gun on us with steady hands. You've been quite useful, she said coldly, the perfect scapegoats. But now you're becoming a problem. In that moment I saw our deaths reflected in her eyes, clinical, emotionless. But Amber stepped forward, putting herself between me and the gun. If you kill us, you'll have real murder charges to deal with, she said, her voice steadier than I could have managed. Art theft has a statute of limitations, murder doesn't. The thieves exchanged glances. She has a point, Helena, the younger one said. A standoff followed, 10 seconds stretching into infinity. Then, sirens wailed outside. The alarm had summoned police. This isn't over, the older woman hissed before they both fled toward a rear exit. Amber turned to me, her eyes wild with adrenaline and something else, something that looked remarkably like love. We should go too. Hand in hand, we raced from the museum into the night, hearts pounding in terrified synchronicity. We'd seen the real thieves, but lost our evidence in the chaos. We were still running, still hiding, but now we knew who we were running from. We need evidence they can't ignore. I paced the beachfront cottage we'd rented with the last of our emergency cash. After the museum disaster, we'd fled to the coast, finding refuge in a tiny rental property that accepted cash with no questions. 3 weeks as fugitives had changed us. My once pristine nails were chipped, my organizational systems replaced by survival instincts. Amber's artistic spontaneity had sharpened into strategic thinking. We'd become a unit, moving and thinking as one. The police report mentioned names, Amber said, pinning newspaper clippings to a makeshift evidence board. Helena and Irene Voska, international art thieves wanted in 7 countries. I searched online forums using public library computers, careful to leave no trace. They've been active for 20 years. Sisters who specialize in modern masterpieces. Their mistake was choosing doubles who actually met, Amber said, sliding her arms around my waist from behind. They couldn't have predicted us. The word us still sent electricity through me. Whatever happened with the law, with the thieves, with our former lives, this connection was real. We need to document every theft, establish our whereabouts for each one, I said, leaning back into her embrace. Build a case the police can't ignore. We created a timeline, gathering news articles and security footage timestamps. Amber sketched the sisters from memory with remarkable accuracy. I organized alibis for each theft, receipts, witnesses, anything that could prove our innocence. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly. While researching the sisters online, I found a gallery owner who'd worked with them years ago, before they turned to crime. Maxwell Green, I read from the screen, still runs a gallery in Fresno. Maxwell? Amber's eyes widened. I know him. He hosted my first exhibition. It was risky returning to Fresno, but we had no choice. We arranged to meet Maxwell privately after hours at his gallery. His shock at seeing Amber was genuine. My dear girl, you're wanted by the police, he exclaimed, gesturing to a newspaper with our faces on it. That's why we're here, Amber explained. We need your help. Maxwell listened to our story with increasing concern. Helena and Irene, yes, I remember them. Brilliant art historians before they turned to theft. They tried to recruit me once. Would you testify that we were here, with you, during the Carlton Museum theft? I asked. It happened 2 blocks from here, while we were at Amber's exhibition. He hesitated only briefly. Of course. I remember you both clearly from that night. You never left until after the reported time of the theft. With Maxwell's statement and our collected evidence, we had our first solid alibi. It wasn't complete exoneration, but it was a start. We returned to our beach hideaway, energized by progress. The small cottage had become our sanctuary, waves crashing outside our window, salt air cleansing the fear from our lungs. That night, with moonlight spilling across the bed, Amber traced patterns on my skin with artist's fingers. We might actually pull this off, she whispered. We will, I promised, pulling her closer. What followed was a celebration of possibility, of hope rekindled after weeks of fear. Her lips mapped constellations across my body, each touch electric, each sigh a promise. I lost myself in the curve of her hip, the soft skin of her inner thigh, the taste of her desire. I never want to organize my way out of this, I whispered against her neck. She laughed, the sound vibrating through both our bodies. And I never want to minimize what we've found. When release came, it was like breaking through the surface after too long underwater, sudden, desperate, and life-affirming. We clung to each other afterward, sweat slicked and trembling, the future suddenly seeming possible again. When this is over, Amber said, her head on my chest, what happens to us? I considered the question, feeling the weight of all the unknowns. But one thing had become crystal clear during our weeks as fugitives. We stay us, I answered simply. Everything else we can figure out together. Our exoneration came with the autumn winds, almost exactly 3 months after our first meeting on the lakeshore. The Voska sisters were arrested in Madrid attempting to sell the Rothko they'd stolen while we watched. International authorities found a warehouse of stolen masterpieces, including all the paintings we'd been blamed for taking. Miss Anderson? This is Detective Powell from Fresno PD, the voice on my burner phone said. We'd like you and MS Perry to come in. Your names have been cleared. Just like that, we were free. The transition back to normal life felt surreal. Press conferences where we were portrayed as victims, not criminals, discussions with lawyers about possible compensation, calls from friends and clients wondering where we'd been. My first day back at my organizing business, I stood in my perfectly arranged office and felt like a stranger. The woman who had color-coded her calendar and alphabetized her client files seemed like someone I'd once known, but no longer fully recognized. Does it feel strange? Amber asked that evening as we sat in my apartment, surrounded by my meticulously arranged possessions. Everything does, I admitted. I keep waiting to feel relief, but mostly I feel lost, she supplied. Found, I corrected. But not sure where to go next. The question hung between us. With danger removed, with normal life resuming, what were we to each other? A crisis romance? A temporary alignment of opposite souls? I've been offered a teaching position, Amber said carefully. At the Arts College, permanent faculty. My heart stuttered. You're staying in Fresno? She nodded, watching me closely. If there's a reason to stay. There is, I said, perhaps too quickly. There definitely is. The months that followed were an exercise in integration, not just of Amber into my life or me into hers, but of the people we'd become while on the run, with the people we'd been before. I learned to embrace a bit of creative chaos, while Amber discovered the freedom that came with certain kinds of structure. My business thrived, with a new specialty in artist studios. Amber's work gained recognition, her experiences infusing her minimalist style with new emotional depth. We moved in together after 6 months, finding a loft with enough space for her art and enough order for my sanity. On the anniversary of our first meeting, I suggested we revisit the lake where it all began. The autumn air carried the same crispness, the water reflecting a perfect blue sky. I have something for you, I said, suddenly nervous. From my bag, still organized but now containing the occasional unexpected item, I pulled out the sketchbook that had washed up a year ago. I'd secretly retrieved it from her studio weeks earlier. My old sketchbook? She asked, confused. Open it, I urged. She flipped through pages of her own drawings until she reached a new edition, my careful diagram of a ring, with measurements and specifications. Turn the page, I whispered. The ring itself was nestled in a cutout in the following pages, a simple band of gold holding a small emerald that matched her eyes. Stephanie. Her voice caught. I used to think life was about maintaining perfect order, I said, taking her hands. You taught me it's about finding the essential amid the chaos. And you, Amber Perry, are the most essential thing I've ever found. Her yes was a whisper against my lips, the kiss that followed a promise of chaos and order in perfect balance. Around us, autumn leaves danced in the breeze, neither clinging to past seasons nor fearing the winter ahead, simply existing in the perfect present we'd created together. As we walked hand in hand along the shore where it all began, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful discoveries come not from careful planning, but from the courage to let go of the maps we've drawn and follow the unexpected path that appears when we least expect it.